In this video, we're going to be just thinking about refining what we're doing melodically with setting our song words. And part of this is going to involve word painting, and a lot of it is going to be focused on thinking about phrases in pairs. Now, that's a concept that may be familiar to you, or you might think, well, why would I want to do that? The answer, of course, is you don't have to. It's perfectly reasonable to think in phrases. So you're thinking about these words. In this case, we're using a familiar text to us. The sun is setting, the light is fading. Well, the sun is setting seems to be one statement. The light is fading is another statement, but it's a kind of complementary statement, isn't it? So it's worth thinking about what the nature of your words is. Have I just got a single statement and then I move on to another single statement? Or am I really looking at two statements that seem to belong to each other? Because often that's the case when we're dealing with words. You have some kind of action with a consequence, or, we're thinking about something happening and then a reflection on it. That often happens in a text. So this is where it's sometimes useful to think about phrases in pairs. Musically, it can help us a lot. And I'm not suggesting, by the way, that from now on you take every single song and you write the whole song in pairs of phrases. That's not the idea. But some of the time, it's a helpful thing to do. If you write the whole song with single phrases that don't particularly belong to each other, then the whole song tends to have a sort of go, stop, go, stop, go, stop feel to it. So it feels a little bit bumpy. But actually, if you can think about pairs of phrases, at least in the places where the text might be suggesting that, it can be a much more effective way of painting your words, but also kind of creating a little bit of musical balance. So in classical terms, we often talk about pairs of phrases as antecedent and consequent phrases. Put it in more basic terms, kind of call and response, that kind of thing. But we can make that much more subtle. So I just want to give you some possible examples of how pairs of phrases might be a useful technique, and just giving you some ideas as to how you would make pairs of phrases actually work in practice, and how that might help to paint the words. So let's have a look at these examples. They're not meant to be exhaustive. You can come up with other possibilities as well. But the first example I'm looking at here involves using sequence. So melodic sequence. In other words, you've got a melodic idea that you're simply going to repeat at a different pitch. So it might come down a note the second time, might go up a note, might come down a third, go up a third. Doesn't really matter. It might be exactly transferred so that every single interval is the same, or it might be that you contract some of the intervals or expand some of the intervals. It can be a kind of direct sequence, or it can be a slightly loose sequence. Sometimes, of course, when you're looking at the totality of a song, you might have a melodic sequence that doesn't belong to a harmonic sequence. Or you might have a harmonic sequence, but a melody that's not sequential. So sometimes that's quite a useful combination. We're thinking at the moment purely in melodic terms. So let's have a look at this first example that I've got for you here. The sun is setting, the light is fading. Okay, this is how I've set it using sequence. Okay, so you see what's happening here. It's not a direct sequence because the very first note, which is anacrusic, is used again at the start of the second phrase. Okay, so you could say, well, surely you could have just come down and done this at the start of the second phrase, then it would be absolutely a direct sequence. Yes, perfectly possible. One reason why I haven't done that is the first phrase starts and ends on G. If the second phrase were to start and end on E flat, there's just a danger it could feel a little bit stuck. So because we've started and ended on the first note in the first phrase, I've decided to start on one note and finish on a different note in the second phrase, just so we don't get that sense of feeling stuck. Also, this note G at the beginning of the second phrase just kind of refers back to the starting note of the first phrase. So it's a way of just very slightly modifying a sequence, but it's still very recognizable as sequential. And those are the reasons that I've chosen to do it in this case. But you notice when we come to light is fading, it's exactly the same as sun is setting, but this time it's a third lower. How does it paint the words? Well, the first phrase, the sun is setting, well, that's a kind of factual statement, isn't it? The sun is setting, we can see that happening. What's the impact of that? Well, one of the impacts is the light is fading. So do you see what we've got in the text? We've got a factual statement followed by a kind of consequence. So that's where sequence can be really effective. It's kind of painting the words. And because I've got a falling sequence, you see how that paints, the sun is setting. Oh, yeah, factual statement. Just notice that. Oh, what's happening? Well, the light is fading, kind of stepping down for the light is fading. So there, a sequence is quite a good way of presenting this as a pair of melodic phrases that belong to each other. There's a kind of relationship, a call and response, an antecedent and consequent, but we're using sequence. Okay, but it doesn't have to be that. Let's have a look at another possibility. What I'm doing in this example, again, treating these as pairs of phrases. You can see the pairs indicated by the red brackets, by the way. This time, I'm trying to present an arch shape across the two phrases. So you might notice here that this first phrase is all on a kind of rising tide. But then the second phrase is falling again. So what I end up with is this kind of arch shape across those two phrases. So they belong to each other, but in a different way from painting a sequence. Okay, well, let's see how it works here. I've put this one in C major. The first one was in C minor, sort of maybe staying in C minor or maybe heading to E flat major. But this one is all in C major. This is how this one goes. So you can hear that there's a different kind of relationship there between the sun is setting, the light is fading. That the first one rising, the sun is setting. Oh goodness, have you seen the sunset? It's lovely. We do that sometimes. Oh, look at that sunset. The sun is setting. We might think about painting the word setting as a downward phrase, as I have done in the first example on this page. But we might also think, oh, look, the sun's setting. It's kind of like it's raising our engagement. And then the light is fading. So you see why an arch shape could also be a very effective way of painting this text. And if you were going to put some expression with that, you may even decide you're going to have a crescendo for the first phrase and a diminuendo for the second phrase. That would help to paint it. So there's a different way of doing it. Okay, let's consider a third possibility. This time I'm writing in D major. Now you might look at this melody and think, oh my goodness, this is the ultimate in boring melody. Well, what am I doing this time? A static melodic setting. Okay, so I've just got one note running through the whole thing. Why would you want to do that? Well, sometimes we put enormous emphasis on melody. That's often a very good thing to do. Sometimes we can afford to sit back melodically and rely on other features of the music to give us some atmosphere. So in this case, I might be relying on the rhythm, for example, but I might be relying on the tempo. A kind of relaxed tempo is helping to paint this, isn't it? I might be using low dynamics. I might be doing things in the accompaniment that are kind of generating movement and atmosphere, even though melodically we're just sitting in a very stationary place. So there's always the temptation to think, right, I've got to get a really good melody to fit with these words. Well, often that might be the case. Sometimes you might just think, I can afford to step off the gas melodically, do something really simple. And there's nothing more simple than just repeating the same note. But thinking, how am I using other musical means to make something really effective here that does still paint the words, that still presents this as a pair of phrases, and might give me a balance to other places in the song where there's a bit more melodic engagement. So let me play this as it stands. We're in D major, we could be in B minor, but this is what it is as it stands. Now you might think, well, that doesn't do anything for me. It might as well be written in Morse code. Yeah, absolutely. But if we kind of use low dynamics, a kind of gentle tempo, have a bit of chord movement, how does it work if we do something like this? Do you see what I've done there? Just kind of using some color chords really, just to do something with the harmony while I'm just sort of reciting this melody on a kind of monotone. It's almost providing a kind of sleepy feel, isn't it? The end of the day, the sun is setting, the light is fading. It's time to go to sleep. It's time to shut down for the day. Time to put the cares of the day behind us. You see, it's a different way of painting the words and a different way of presenting the phrases in pairs. So 3 completely different approaches there. Well, there are more. Let's look at another couple. One thing you might want to think about when you're dealing with this idea of pairs of phrases is what the balance is between disjunct and conjunct movement. Now, I think this is something that we often don't think enough about when we're writing melodies. Quite often people write melodies that you start here, you go up, you come down, you're going to go up again, you come down again. And it kind of is a bit aimless, really. Sometimes people will have melodies that jump about all over the landscape and leave you feeling quite kind of travel sick because it's too dislocated. Actually, achieving a balance between conjunct movement and disjunct movement is a really good thing to do. So just to be sure what we mean by that, conjunct, neighbouring notes, just moving up and down the scale. Disjunct is when we're talking about leaps. They may be narrow leaps or wide leaps. Sometimes within a phrase, within a single phrase, it's quite nice to have a bit of a balance between the two. What I'm suggesting here is that when you're thinking about pairs of phrases, you could have this kind of pattern where your first phrase is really all or mainly disjunct, where your second phrase is mainly conjunct. So you see, in this first phrase, it's entirely disjunct. But in this second phrase, we have a leap initially, but after that, we're either going by step or we're repeating a note. So here's an example just for variety of key in D flat major. So have a listen to this, the pair of phrases, disjunct followed by more conjunct. Now that's quite subtle if you think about it, because you probably weren't over aware of conjunct and disjunct until I mentioned it. But now we have mentioned it, can you hear the impact of that disjunct phrase followed by a much more conjunct phrase? Listen to it again. And again, once you get some harmony in there, well, it probably enhances it even more. And when you've got disjunct movement in a melody, well, you can smooth that out by a bit more conjunct movement in other parts. Something like that. You can hear the impact of the disjunct and the conjunct alongside some harmony. You could do it the other way around. You could do the conjunct thing first and then have the disjunct thing afterwards. And again, I'm sort of thinking about these this pair of phrases in terms of the sun is setting being more of a statement and the light is fading being more of impact of that statement. So therefore, maybe it works slightly better to have disjunct followed by a conjunct, but it's not a big deal. You could do it the other way around. The last example I've got here is something which is really very straightforward, but again, it's something that a lot of people don't really think about, particularly when you're singing something. Well, you've got some differences between vocal registers. You know, if you sing something high, it's got one kind of sound. If you sing something low, it's got a very different kind of sound. If you're in the middle of the register, that can be another color again. So how about you just write the same notes twice for your two phrases, but the second time you're an octave lower than the first time, or vice versa. So in this example in B flat major, this is what I'm doing here. So the sun is setting in the upper octave, followed by the light is fading, same notes, lower octave. Now, it's a very simple thing to do, isn't it? But do you see and hear how effective that can be? And again, you could kind of use different dynamics, maybe a stronger dynamic for the first phrase, a quieter dynamic for the second phrase. If you're accompanying this on the piano, well, you could reflect this change of register in the way you score for the piano as well. So you could do something like this. Okay, so you see what I've done there? Slightly lower dynamic for the second phrase, dropping the piano pitch from the first phrase to the second phrase to reflect that drop in the vocal pitch. But musically, we're doing exactly the same thing twice. So I hope this is kind of giving you a few ideas and that you're now fired up with other possibilities. Well, if you could do that, why couldn't you do this? That's the idea of this. So in other words, what I'm trying to encourage you to do is thinking about word painting. So what do we need to do with the word? Sometimes word painting can be very literal, can't it? You know, he is ascending. So you go up a scale to paint the word ascending. That's fine. That's literal word painting. But there's also this sense in which, you know, sometimes you think, actually, this pair of phrases, they belong together. How can I paint that musically to give a sense of painting the words, but to make a musical connection between one phrase and the next, so we hear that as an entity of both the phrases? Then that might go alongside other pairs of phrases, or it might go alongside other single statement phrases and make for more variety in your song. So I hope that's a helpful way of thinking about the construction of a melodic line when you've got this kind of presentation of the text.